Hello, hello. Lyndall Duscant here. Welcome to Music as a Metaphor. And today we're still mid-July. I'm doing some pre-recorded shows here because I've got a lot of travel coming up and don't know what sort of internet situations I'll be in, etc., etc. So I'm happy to talk today about a very, very important subject that's been coming up forever and a day, and that is perfectionism. Okay, I talked a little bit about it in the last episode because there's a line from a song that I shared last week. It's a song called A Second Chance. You can hear it on my YouTube. I've got a video up. And I'll also put a little clip on my Instagram, all of which is under my name, Lyndall Duscant. A little bit difficult to spell, I know, but you only find one of me out there. And in the chorus, it's striving for perfect, but it never worked out, and I was so lost too. And it's really, last week was a great episode talking about full circle moments and really getting to a place where you release bitterness from your life and you really forgive. It's important. The power of forgiving is so important because there's so many things that have happened to all of us. But after a while, there's this notion of tit for tat, like it will never end. If we just keep tit for tatting with each other, like you did this, so I'm going to do this, and you're going to... At some point, I believe that's one of the biggest parts of Jesus's message was like, you got to rise above it. If you're willing to, and you're willing to say, hey, I'm going to let go of this. It's not about allowing the abuse to continue, but it's about your own heart and being healthy. I was just listening to a whole episode about there being such a real, actual disease called broken heart syndrome. And so it's more about your own health. It's more about clearing and allowing your own energy by letting go of the grievances that I'm sure you've dealt with, especially if you've been an open-hearted type of person. So yeah, in that song, that was the main hook was, I forgive you, I forgive all of it. But there is a line in it that led me to believe maybe now is the perfect time to talk about what is absolutely the biggest block to music and to life in general, I would say, is perfectionism. Okay. And that line once again was striving for perfect, but it never worked out. I mean, I don't know. Does it ever work out for anybody, the perfectionism? Sometimes I have been able to look around and it seems like there's certain people that are truly able to walk this line of like seeming like their lives are pretty perfect. Okay, I'm talking like perfect organization and they're always looked together and the relationships seem pretty together. But I'm going to say that I think maybe a lot of that is a facade and that you can actually effectively live from that facade maybe your whole life. And I'm writing an article right now that will most likely be up on my blog spot by the time this comes out. And it is about perfectionism, but I couldn't even write about perfectionism. I've been writing for years now about different blocks that have faced musicians that I've run into, writing from this perspective of music as a metaphor. So I see the micro to the macro. I see within music lessons things that keep people from playing their best music. Excuse me, I'm going to get my coffee. Hang on. So things that keep people from playing their best music also keep them from living their best life. You know, it's that micro to macro. And so I've been writing about these subjects for years, and you'll see some of them up on your blog, and I hope to have a book coming together sometime in the future. But in the meantime, I couldn't actually write about perfectionism. I was writing about all these other subjects, and knowing that perfectionism was the biggest thing that people faced, I couldn't even write about it yet. And why was that? Well, you could say, well, it's also because it's one of the biggest blocks that I've had to my life. And sometimes it's really difficult for us to sort of face these things. We'd rather sort of keep them on the peripheral. But that's exactly what the great work is about, is bringing things into the light of our consciousness so we can heal them and we can move the energy on them and we can get past them and live a different life. But it was also because that's the exact insidiousness of perfectionism that I have seen. And what makes it actually, I think, the worst of all blocks is that it keeps people from even starting. That is the most insidious part of it. That I believe that perfectionism is one of the biggest reasons that people don't start the projects that they dream of, their creative projects on any level. And I've seen this happen with people who are really in the throes of perfectionism. They have all these amazing ideas, but they can't ever get them started. And it's because when it's time to start, sometimes you just got to jump in, okay, and figure it out as you go. That's the way that creative pursuits often work, that we're only given one or two steps ahead of time. We don't know the full way it's going to work out. And it's one of the reasons I love being creative, because it feels miraculous when you go ahead and start a project and then everything comes together as you're working on it. But so many people with this perfectionist mindset, they want to know it all before they start, and they want to know that it's going to be fantastic, and they want to know that it's going to be successful, and they're already thinking of all of that as opposed to the actual creative project itself and getting inside of the creative project. So, this is one of the things that my story briefly is that I played music as a girl, and my teacher was a classical teacher. And in classical music, there is a lot of an emphasis on playing it perfectly, right? And so many people misinterpret music in the first place as this game of playing the right notes versus the wrong notes. Okay, this is what happens when music gets divorced completely from the creative right brain, which oftentimes does happen to people by the age of 7 just by the school system itself. And I've seen this a lot in students, young students, that just want to be told what notes to play. They don't want to have any sort of choice in the matter. And then when it is that, it's a game of playing the right notes versus playing the wrong notes. And there's also then the idea of it's supposed to be perfect. And if it's not, they internalize it somehow, that they're the one who's wrong, that everybody else can do this and they can't. This is one of the biggest myths that keeps people not only in those instances with the children, their parents are making them take lessons, and they might even enjoy that game of right and wrong, but it doesn't allow them to feel the true joy and power of music, which is so much more than that. And then, unfortunately, for the ones, so they'll have a very one-sided, one-dimensional view of music, that it's about playing, these great composers from the past, they could compose music, but I never could. And now my whole existence is just to play the notes the way they played it. And if I don't, then I'm wrong. Then, it can feel terrible actually hitting a wrong note. And this is one of the reasons why so many students later in life never want to play music, because it's so stressful. And then you bring them into recitals, even more stressful right now. And I remember this, I had so much anxiety going into recitals that I was just going to play it wrong and play the wrong note. And the more you psych yourself out on that level, then in reality, the more wrong notes you play, because there's a certain level of trust and breath and letting go that allows all of the muscle memory that you've worked on to come into play. And then you get into a scenario in front of your teacher, or you get in this pressure of playing the right notes, and suddenly you can't play it right. And everybody's like, why? Why is that? Well, you're in a different mindset than where you need to be, which is the ability to, right or wrong, allow yourself to flow. And then crazily enough, you can get into this super cool track and zone if you've practiced enough, right? If you've taken the time and the repetitions to have the muscle memory, then you get into a zone with it and you can't play the wrong note now. It's just that you have it's so cool when you can get into that spot. It's like time stops and you have an infinite amount of time to find the right notes. Okay. When you experience that place in music, and granted, it can be rare. Okay. I've even heard greats like Pat Metheny talk about occasionally they have a night where they get it right. And so I think sometimes it's less about what actually is being played and more about this feeling you can get into where you absolutely cannot play the wrong notes. And that's the kind of perfectionism that actually we're seeking. Okay, it's this weird perfectionism that where we're letting go completely and trusting, but everything is still working out perfectly for us and in the right way. It's bigger than us. It's more expanded than us, and it's including the right brain, and it's a place beyond fear. Okay, the fear is not what's controlling us at that point, because we are not afraid to fail at that point. So backing up, this is what, when people are too into controlling what they play and they're too afraid to play the wrong notes, and even then their self-esteem and their self-worth is tied into whether or not they can play the right notes, all of this is binding up the system, and it's not allowing the right creative brain in there, and you're operating out of fear and you're operating out of control. And so you are not going to be able to understand the true magic of music, nor would I postulate are you really experiencing the true magic of life when you're living in a co-creative way, when you're living with your spirit. Because with spirit I'm going to propose a new definition of perfectionism, and it has nothing to do with our own conceptions. It has to do with the humility of letting go that we don't know it all. And so that even when we do something that we might deem a mistake, it can still be perfect in the grand scheme of things. Okay? So that's just a little bit of a, stepping into this subject. And it's a subject that I think we'll have to have multiple episodes. We'll have to have multiple blog posts on. It's something that I really, really have to work a lot with adults on over and over and over again, because it is so insidious. It is really so insidious. So let me read a few quotes. Let me back up here. This was from a book I was reading a few years ago. I don't think I ever quite finished the book, but I thought she had a really nice handle on addressing this. And there's so many self-help books out there right now trying to address this very thing. So let me read a couple of these quotes from Wild World, Joyful Heart. This is Lori Warren. One of them is that perfectionism and a healthy self-worth don't coexist. I absolutely think this is true, because I think that perfectionism in the bound up way that we're talking as the block that it can be is all about a low self-esteem that you're trying to prove through works, through what you can do. And it's also often associated with a very unrealistic view of others in the world, a view that everybody else can get it right, but you can't. And I see this a lot in music, because, to be honest with you, mistakes are part of music. They're just part of it. If you want to ever be able to play meaningful music, even if you wanted to become the best in music, okay, and we're going to talk about this a little later in this as well, because perfectionism is so tied in with competition and the competition mindset. But backing up here, if you truly had that ambition, the truth is the people that I have seen that get the closest to that really truly excel at music, they are okay with mistakes. It has no bearing on their own self-esteem. It is not, their self-esteem is intact. And now they're able to just play music, and they recognize that mistakes are part of it. And the best thing to do is just rebound from them and move on. Right? I talk a lot about one student in particular that I just couldn't believe. She had zero. When I was working with her, I couldn't even understand what it was about her that was so different from other students. But I've known her for a very long time now, and I recognized at a certain point she didn't have the perfectionism demon. She just didn't have it. She didn't worry about being perfect. It wasn't about being perfect. She just loved playing music. And I'll tell you, she has become an avid composer. She is becoming a professor. She plays absolutely angelic music on the flute and the piano. And she has there's been times when I've heard her talk about a mistake. Like, she's had a performance and it's like, oh, I did this or that. But it never stops her. It's like it never makes her feel terrible about herself because she made a mistake. The people that are really bound up with perfectionism, it is a bearing on that. It is crushing for them. to make a mistake. It's crushing for them to realize they were wrong. And I think we're seeing this a lot right now in the world we live in, because many, the world that we're living in right now, I think it's very important to be able to admit that you're wrong. And I, in my own way, was not able to come to a place where I could do that and not feel crushed by it, not feel like so unworthy, was through truly understanding the message of the gospel. Okay, it was truly understanding that we don't have to be perfect to be worthy and to be saved. I mean, Christ died for all of us, and he knew how depraved all of us were. He knew the sin. But also, when you look at the world, we were all born into a heritage of sin. So once again, tit for tat, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Were we a terrible person, or did we have no choice to become a terrible person because we were born into a world that basically indoctrinates us all to be a bunch of beep holes? So, all of that is a topic for a different episode, but I do want to mention that the worst part about all of this is the pride that's happening with this, but it's not founded, right? It's a pride. It's a pride that's covering up a very profound insecurity. It's not a healthy self-worth. So we're always out trying to prove how perfect we are. And it can get so sick and in such a fantasy land that when we make mistakes, we're unwilling to admit it, and we just double down and double down and double down. And that's what I feel like we see from a lot of people these days, especially on the macro level, where they've been cheering for some politician or some party, or they've been so sure that they were so right about something that they were even condemning and making fun of other people. Well, now when it's kind of comes to the fold that, hey, maybe I wasn't right about that, maybe I was lied to, they're unable to admit it. They're absolutely unable to admit it. And it is at that point, it becomes, a pathology. It becomes a real disorder. And I guess this is partially of what's leading into the narcissism, right? Because narcissism, it is coming from such a profound insecurity. And so you have to live in this facade. And that facade is so much about control. You have to be able to control, because if you can't control what's going on around you, then you absolutely, the fear that ensues, you absolutely don't feel safe in the world. You absolutely cannot trust. All of this is coming from profound, profound trauma that people have faced in their youth. So, Lord have mercy, I've come to a place where a lot of the bitterness that I've faced about dealing with people who truly are under the control of a narcissistic borderline personality issue, and I believed their facade, and it turns out this wasn't right. I've been able to come to a level of compassion with those people, whilst at the same time, through wisdom, staying out of the realm of being hurt by them. But at the same time, recognizing that the profound trauma that they went through, their response, there's such a level of fear that they are stuck in on a very basic level that they have to live out in this facade. And this facade is so much about them seeing themselves as perfect, and they cannot allow themselves to even question that. Because if they did, the level of fear that they would have to go through could kill them. And as a little baby or as a little child, that fear possibly really could have killed them. So we're living with a lot of people in that place, and perfectionism is, a part of that. Now, there's many people who don't have narcissism and they're still living in a level of perfectionism. And for these people, it's even sadder in a way, because they're just not doing everything that they dream of doing, and they're making a lot of safe choices because they can control those choices. They feel in control. Okay, that's what they share with the narcissist is, and I'm sure there's a lot of crossovers of perfectionism and narcissist, and a lot of people with perfectionism that might have some narcissistic tendencies of just, caring so much about their image, right? All of us in the United States, I think, have this to a certain degree. I think all of us are entitled to a certain degree, and all of us have bought into this idea that we can control our lives. We are in control. When in reality, I just don't think that's true. Okay, I don't think that that's the case. And the good news is you don't need to be in control. The good news is there's a certain way of living if you're able to admit your own weaknesses, your own faults. If you're willing to be honest with yourself and face the fears and the trauma that you have, that you can recognize that no amount of you trying to control things will ever really add up to anything. And it certainly won't add up to an authentic life, because in reality, none of us are in control of things that happen here. There's many, many things beyond our control. There's nothing new under the sun. And we are all, it's better to just accept our lot in life, that we are just one tiny human being, and that we don't know everything. We can't know everything. And this whole idea about us replacing God is sort of the original sin idea. It was what we were sort of tempted into by Satan, or the serpent. And it's just not, it's never led to any amount of happiness for us. It's really only led to despair and shame, because in reality, I think that we're meant to live as co-creators with God. We're meant to lean on Him. We're meant to understand that He has the perfect knowledge of everything going on, and that we don't need it. That through a trusting relationship with Him, that we can walk forward in a life in a way that things aren't going to happen the way that we always want them to, but they can end up being even better than we imagine them to, right? It's a letting go of our littleness, not to become the bigness, but to become part of the bigness, right? So we're a drop in the ocean, but when we're trying to run around and pretend like we're the whole ocean as a drop, we look like idiots, okay? Because we're not really controlling anything. We're just acting like a bunch of beep holes. And it's going to lead to low self-esteem, right? Because in reality, even if we don't face things that we're experiencing, it doesn't make them not true. Just because we want to bury our heads in the sand and just pretend, it doesn't change reality the way that, maybe all of the guys in the 80s about think and manifest and all that stuff. All of that stuff falls short from a certain way, because it doesn't acknowledge that God is sovereign and that we are invited to be co-creators with God, but we are not ever going to be able to replace God. That is the big mistake. That is the mistake that we have to be willing to realize that all of us have made on some level. Otherwise, I don't think we'd be here in this world, and we certainly wouldn't be falling for all the deception that we've fallen for. There's some level of us falling for this pride that it wasn't enough to just be co-creators with God. Wait, what is this? Oh, hang on a second. Blip here. So it's enough to be a co-creator with God. It's enough to learn how to sort of balance different parts, to balance effort with letting go, right? With balancing action with rest. And I think it's the same thing with allowing ourselves to become a creator, but submitting to God's will as to what we will create. And many people, when they hear this, if they're in their ego and they're in this pride, they think, oh, I don't want that. I want what I want. But the truth is, when we do that, it's like we're disconnected, we're in separation, and it never really does lead to what we want. Though for some reason it feels like some people can live a lifetime and never recognize that, and they're doubling down and they're just heading a certain direction that's causing nothing but misery for them and other people, and it does catch up to them, I believe. But when we instead learn and really recognize through spending time with God that He wants for us even more than we imagine for ourselves, because many of us still stuck in low self-esteem. And we're stuck on trying to earn our way back. Even if we recognize that when we want to be back with God, then there's that mistake of trying to earn our way back with Him. And we're still in control. We're still trying to make things the way we think they should be. And so this is the power of a music practice. This is a power of facing that block through music. Because when I picked up music as an adult, as I mentioned, I was with a classical teacher when I was young, and I very much was in that, I would bring things to the lesson. I would be making up my own songs, and I'm not going to say they were great songs, but it was strange because she wouldn't even acknowledge them as like part of music, right? It was like learning the classical masters, learning how to sight read. The whole game was just, here's a note on a page, can you learn how to read it and play it? And that was it. There wasn't even really an emphasis on expressing that. And so I quit piano. Now, I always kept singing. I always kept making up my little songs, but I was hitting walls because I'd only had the knowledge of what I had learned through my piano lessons for the 5 years I had as a girl. So my songs were always kind of sounding the same, and it wasn't fun. And that's one of the things I learned at that point, that part of the joy of music is getting better. Okay, and this is one of the biggest things that can help your self-esteem and your self-worth. And it's what I used it for when I picked it back up in my early 20s. It was only going to be something for myself in my room at night because I was so shut down that I'm ashamed to say there was these opportunities that were happening for me in college, and if I had had this attitude of who cares how I sound and just got up there, I'm sure I would have been experiencing the joy of music and the motivation to pick up a practice, and I would have had these great people to do that with. But instead, I refused. I absolutely refused to step on stage in some of these opportunities and sing, even though I was singing all the time by myself. And it was that perfectionism. I didn't want to mess up. I didn't want to be seen as a fool. I didn't want to take the risk. But every time after, when I'd have these opportunities and I would have refused it, I was so shut down, I couldn't step into it, I would be so angry. I would be so frustrated. I would feel so wrong that I finally did decide to go ahead and pick it up on my own, but only for myself in my room at night. I've spoken of this story many times. And I was like 21 at this point, and I had to fight this constant voice that's saying, like, what are you doing? You will never be a good musician. You can't pick up music now and get anywhere decent with it. You can't have a music career. This is unserious. As an adult, why aren't you out doing the other things that adults do, which I guess would have just been out drinking with friends, or like, I'm not even sure what I thought I should have been doing, but there was this very, very strong judgment on me sitting there doing this at night that I was being such a fool. Okay, why was I doing it? And if it wasn't for the fact of seeing it as a spiritual practice and seeing it as something that I needed for myself, and just being very, very sure that I needed this for myself to heal, because at this point I had already been through some major heartbreak and some things that just absolutely devastated me. And I was dealing with a severe depression, and somehow, and I don't know where I got the idea, I'm sure it wasn't just internal, I think it was external as well, but it was clear that this was my mode of healing, and that's why I needed to do it. So that was the voice. That's what I would retort back to this voice. Like, I know I'm not going to be a famous musician, okay? I know I'm not going to be some successful. I know I'm not even going to be able to participate with these people that I was still in contact with, because I had shut them down so many times when they would give me invitations to do music. But I knew it was something that I had to do. So night after night, one of the things it did for me was, number one, facing that voice and recognizing that there was more to life than being the best. Because that was absolutely what made me quit as a girl, was recognizing, and I kid you not, I had this exact thought, that by the time I was 12, nobody was acknowledging the songs I had written, and I'd heard about Mozart, how by 12 he was already playing for the kings and queens. And it was like, if by 12 I'm not really that good, I don't want to do this, because I only want to be the best in life. I only want to be the best. So if I haven't been discovered by 12 as being an exceptional talent, then I don't even want to do this. And that's the insidiousness. That's how perfectionism is tied in with competition and tied in with pride. Because so many people live with that overlay that competition is everything in this world, and that they want to be the best. They want to be the number one. And why waste their time if they're not going to? And that was the same voice I was facing in my 20s. It was just like, you're not going to be the best. There's no chance. Now, maybe it was also countered by a small fantasy like, oh, God's just going to make me amazing. And if I'm doing this for a spiritual practice, then all of a sudden one day I'm just going to be amazing and God's going to get me in front of audiences. Maybe there was that fantasy there too that would keep me going at times. And that's what I mean, that so often we're dealing with our egos even inside of our spiritual practice that we really have to be honest about. But there was something else driving me underneath, and it kept me coming back night after night. And it number one, humbled me, and I needed that. Okay, I had so much pride in me at that point, and I believe so many Americans do. And we really do have to face our pride, because so much of it is based on lies and feeling entitled and ignoring the suffering of other people in the world, when in reality we've been causing other people's suffering. And here we are, just been bragging about ourselves, and just, it's not right. The level of pride that so many of us need to repent from is immense. So number one, sitting down to a music practice is absolutely humbling, and it's one of the reasons I would recommend so many adults, because how can you, if you realize how prideful you are, you can't just look in the mirror and be like, quit being prideful, right? Like you have to actually have to work on your character at that point, and it's not going to be an overnight thing. Okay, so night after night, you're sitting down to a music practice, you're facing the humility of like, I will never be good at this, but I love this. And I wish I could be really good at this, but I'm not. And then the pain of hearing all your wrong notes. And then there was even a lot of pride, like, oh, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to be able to be great in just a few years, and the humility of the years passing, and you're not progressing as much as you might have hoped. All of that builds character, because guess what? You get to a place where you don't care. You love music. You accept, and this is the antidote to the perfectionism. You learn to accept yourself for who you are and where you are. And that is a very, very profound, understated thing to say, is recognizing that there is such a power in accepting who you are in the moment. And it means you got to drop your facade. It means you got to drop the fantasies, right? It means you got to be brutally honest with yourself at times. But there's a power in it. Because in that power is the ability to actually make transformation in your life, to actually get better, to actually head a different direction. Because one of the things that happened, and let me take a sip of this. One of the things that happens a lot in the world that we live in today, and this is in the Bible, is that people want the wisdom. They go to the workshops. They read the Bible. They read the self-help books. They know they're a perfectionist, right? But it never actually changes. And this is one of the things they don't even really want to be honest with themselves about. But in these moments they do, and they just, there was one of the Bible verses about the seeds being sown, and there's people that they just want their ears tickled, but they don't actually want to do the work to make the change, right? They want to stay in their pride. They want to stay in their fantasies, but they know something's not quite right. And so they go to all the self-help, they do all this stuff, but they can't actually make the change. They don't actually head in a direction where, as the years pass, they see themselves having the fruits of the Spirit, becoming more patient, becoming more loving, having healthier relationships, having more fulfillment in their own life, having less emotional breakdowns, right? All of these things, and it's tricky because you can be doing these self-help books, and all of them are like, yeah, it's not going to happen overnight. You got to work on this stuff. And the years pass and the years pass and the years pass. And you're always projecting your hope into the future, and you're not accepting yourself for where you're at right now. Because when you really accept where you're at right now, and you're really honest with where you're at right now, then you can actually start to make the changes. And the metaphor would be like with music. You really do just sit down every night for 30 minutes to an hour, and you're exactly where you are. There's no lying to yourself. That's what I love about music. There's no lying to yourself. You hear exactly where you're at. you see exactly where you're at. And then you see over the years how much you're actually getting better or not. I deal with this a lot with adults because it's been frustrating for me at times dealing with adults that listen to all these really great jazz masters and all these really great people, and they take all these classes from them, and they don't really want an honest assessment of where they're at with the piano. So I will give them work to do. And a big part of being a piano teacher, the benefit of having a piano teacher is that we're going to be honest with you. Okay. Now, if you're skilled at it, you know the right amount of honesty that you can give somebody. And you also know at times when you don't need to be truly honest, but you just need to pull them through, with skills that will help them get to a better place. But what's hard is when adults will take a lesson, they'll get my advice, and then they don't want to play for me. The next week, they don't want to show me the skill that we talked about. It's like, no, I'm good at that. Can we do something else? But it's like, no, that's actually what you need to do is you need to play it for me. Okay. We need to hear where you're at with it. And every week we're going to take the temperature of it. And every week we're going to slightly adjust it. And we're going to figure out how long do you need to sit on this versus when do we need to change it up for you. But the good news is by doing that, you actually are going to improve. There's no question in my mind. All right. If you are actually spending the time doing that skill, there's no question you will get better. But the problem is some of these adults want to like kind of dip in and dip out of lessons, but they don't actually really want to do the work. And then they don't appreciate music teachers that are going to be honest. They want more than music teachers that are really great players and they're going to pay like $300 to take a lesson, basically just to hear that person talk. And they're never going to have to be responsible for where their level of playing is. And they can pick songs that are way above their level, and they can like play it for a few months, and then when it doesn't come together, just switch to a new song. And this is what I think happens. This is a metaphor for what happens with a lot of self-help, even with a lot of Christian circles of prophecy and different things. You just want the feel-good stuff. You want to go and get inspired, and you want to feel inspired, but you don't want to actually be honest with yourself about where you're at in life and the things that really do need to be, where you got to step up and say, I made a mistake. I'm wrong about this. Lord, help me. I'm going to release, or it's also in that way of like, when we say, I'm aligned with God's will. I am a Christian. I believe in Christ, but don't touch this area of my life. This area I've got control over. I won't even let you look at this area. I'm going to completely control this area. Right. So sometimes we need help to be honest about those things in our life. And this is where in real life, people bump up against us. We can use them in the great work. We can use everybody, whether they're a sinner or a saint or whoever they are. They can be seen as a mirror on some level. And I think that concept, I'm hesitant to even say that because I think that concept has been just absolutely bastardized in such a way where, you can take on too much, codependently take on too much responsibility for the people. You have to have the wisdom to discern what is it that this person is bringing to your attention. What are you meant to learn from this person? And it's not always like, oh, they're a liar, so I'm a liar. There's been a lot of new age application of that law in a really stupid way. And this is really what we're lacking in a lot of ways is wisdom. Okay, grounded wisdom, balanced wisdom. And this is part of what I'm talking about that perfectionism blocks people from. So I'm going to go back to music lessons to explain that music can really involve your full brain. Okay, it is in part learning skills and learning notes on the page. That is part of it. But there's another part of it that's about letting go and trusting and allowing mistakes, accepting where you are, and allowing, being really fully present in a moment where you're not operating out of fear of mistakes. You're facing that fear of mistakes and you're getting past it. You're bigger than that. Because I do believe the fear will always be there on a certain level. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe some people truly get past it. I myself have only been able to get bigger than the fear. Okay, I've only been able to feel the fear and then not let it stop me, right? Especially when I'm dealing with performance scenarios. But it's fantastic when you can just blow right through it, right? The fear is there, but you get started anyways, and then you just blow right past it. And you get to this wonderful, wonderful place where all the training you have done is there in muscle memory. And you can trust that. And you can also trust your soul and your spirit to come through and express the way that it needs to. And that to me is the true magic of music, is letting you understand what it feels like to live fully present in a moment, fully trusting, not jumping into the future and trying to control all of it. Okay, I was at a jazz jam again this week, and this came when I was sitting there in the audience thinking about it. It became very clear, one of the reasons why I love jazz jams. Because I'll be honest with you, there's times when the style of jazz itself is not the music that I want to hear. I'm much more groove oriented. The way that drummers play jazz is too many cymbals for me, too many hits. I like much more groove oriented music where you can kind of get into a trance. I like more pop type of melodies. I like more rock and roll sounds. I like more fusion of all that, but I love improvisation, okay? I love jam bands, really. I mean, I'm kind of coming full circle to jam bands, which was the whole reason that I got into music. It's what gave me the courage to get into music, was hearing the power of what happens when musicians are playing from that place, not just notes on a page, not just having... that's one of the things that I think has happened to music, and one of the things that happened with a lot of the bands I had played with is that there's such a fear of not sounding good that you plan everything out ahead of time. And listen, that can still be great. Music on any level is great, but it was not the music I loved. The music I loved is more where Norah Jones talks about, is that you take the risk. You're taking a risk. You get past the fear and you don't control it anymore. And instead you take the risk. It could sound good or it could sound bad, but either way, you're going to walk that tightrope fully present in the moment. And you're not going to let your own fear start to control and jump forward in the future. And when I was sitting in this jazz jam, I was remembering this because I haven't been to enough jazz jams in the last 4 years because of COVID. And, certainly not the way I was before COVID. And as I was sitting there, I was just recognizing that that's what I love about jazz musicians. And many of them are honestly not spiritual. They're not even thinking about this, but they've become masters at the ability to just be in the moment and to let go and not have any need to be perfect or to sound good. And to just be fully present with each other in the moment. And in that way, they always actually know exactly what to do. And this is the most important thing, their timing is dead on. It is just dead on. And it's this zone that you get in. And they're every week, every night, practicing being in that zone as an actual skill. Okay, in addition to them playing their instrument in incredible ways, they're practicing being present in a mindset where their full brain is being used. They're absolutely accepting themselves. And this is the interesting thing too. They have to accept the musicians around them. Okay. And trust me, there's many times that they're playing with people that aren't playing the way they want it to play, but they can't get into that mindset of like, oh, you just messed up, or, oh, you should have done this. There's no room for that. It's acceptance, completely radical acceptance. And by that, they can get into a zone where everything they do actually ends up working out. And ends up working out. Because the truth is, it's an experience of being able to play music with each other. And there's times when it's just kind of like, yeah, we did a song, there was some mistakes, baha, let's move on to the next song. And then there's times when, man, you get to a zone, you get to a place that was never possible if fear had been involved. It just can't. So that's the metaphor, okay? That's the way that we can use music to try to get past this perfectionism and recognize that there's a way to live that's bigger than our fear, number one, bigger than our trauma. So it's a motivation to heal these traumas, to get past our fear, to not let it rule us, but also to recognize in humility that we're only part of something. You know, we don't have to have all the answers. It's actually really unwise to think that we understand every situation and every person and everything, and that all we have to do is execute our control over these scenarios and everything's going to be perfect. Okay? That's just ridiculous. And I think you can get to the end of your life having lived that way and recognizing that you never actually lived, that it kept you from ever actually living an authentic life. Who you truly are. You could die and recognize that you never truly loved. You never truly allowed yourself to be intimate with people. You never actually did the things that you wanted to do. And you might be top of your game, okay? You might be number one, and you might have had everybody's worship, but that is not going to fulfill your spirit. That is not what your spirit cares about. And when you're facing your death at the end of your life, guess what? Your facades, your personalities, how perfect you were, that adds up to beep. Okay? It's nothing. So this is what I love about music. This is what I love about a music practice. This is what I love about working with adults. Although it's been quite frustrating because so many adults, I think, would love to pick up an instrument, and they never do it because they just don't want to deal with the hours and hours of feeling like they're absolutely terrible, hearing themselves sound terrible for years. But that's why I'm trying to make the case for it's not time that's wasted. It's not wasted time, okay? Because let me go back and do a couple of things, because if perfectionism is something that's affecting you as an adult, then you might as well face it in a music practice. You might as well deal with it there, because it is a very, very hard thing to eradicate from your life. This is one of the ways that it can also manifest. It says a perfectionist psyche can feel okay only if everything is completely reliable and controllable. That is coming from fear. That is coming from a trauma response. And it's such it leads to so many people having anxiety, right? I know a lot of women that are like this, and I've talked a lot about this. They can't rest. They've always got to be doing something. And I felt this too, where you're sitting down, but you're not comfortable. You can't rest unless you know that all of these ducks, all these things that are on your mind are in order. Right? And then you can relax. Except the problem is that years pass and nothing's ever always in order, right? Because when you get this list done, another list pops up. And then, so I see a lot of women who are stuck in that nervousness. And unfortunately, I feel really, really awful for them, because it's wreaking havoc on their relationships. People don't like being around somebody like that, okay? You're not being present with people, number one. Number two, you're being way more controlling than you realize. And in your mind, it's not controlling, right? In your mind, you're just doing things for people, and you're helping people, and especially women do this. We're making food, and we're doing this, and we're doing everything for other people. And so why would they not enjoy it? Well, in reality, you're actually being controlling, and you're not allowing other people the space for them to live the way that they want to live. And you have to be honest about that. A lot of women are facing this. There's a book I recommend highly if you're one of them. It's called Having a Mary Heart and a Martha World, and I just read this today about being yoked with Jesus. If you have a difficulty resting, then you are stuck in a trauma response. You are stuck in fear. You are stuck in anxiety that you do not have to live with. But you have to be willing to accept that that's where you are, and you have to be willing to do something about it, right? And so having a Mary Heart and a Martha World is a lot about learning to rest and learning about that wisdom, the balance of action versus rest, pushing versus letting go and allowing. And if you are too stuck in a trauma response, you cannot let go. You cannot allow. You can't even let other people be who they are, because you know better. You think better. And there's a lot of pride in all that, right? There's a lot of you thinking too highly of yourself. So music practice can be the perfect way to deal with these things. And it takes the emphasis off of ever the outcome, right? Which is another thing that happens with perfectionism. It's so focused on the outcome. and you're not in reality enjoying the process or being present with the process, which is where the true magic and transformation happens. So focus instead on that. Even if it's not a music practice, maybe it's something else that you really want to do, but you talk yourself out of even starting because you're so convinced you're not going to know how to do it, or it's not going to be perfect, or it's going to be a waste of time. You could better be spending the time over here doing this, this, and this, making money here, yeah, all the different reasons in your head. In reality, change that into, no, actually, this might help me develop the character and the wisdom that I need to live an overall balanced life, which will change everything for you. And then it will allow things to come into your life in a much more effortless way, because you'll start to build the trust muscles. You'll start to build the ability to let go. You'll start to see how magical life can be when you don't try to make it all about you. And instead, as the drop in the ocean, you start to trust the ocean again. And you start to recognize that it was lies and trauma and bad things that happened to you that ever made you feel that you needed to live in fear. That once you can grow past that fear, you can recognize that, no, actually, I'm part of something loving. I have a God that cares for me, that I can be flawed and weak and everything of horrible of which I don't even want to admit myself, and I'm still loved, right? It's sort of an expansion beyond your personality, beyond being perfect. And I'm going to say that right now because I don't even know if this episode, really explained well this topic. It's just such a big topic, and it's so personal to myself. Trust me, I've lived so much of my life holding back and ruining opportunities over my what I'm now really recognizing are irrational fears. But I'm coming from a space of absolute forgiveness of myself and forgiveness of some of the ways in which these traumas were brought into my life. Some of the big mistakes I've made in life that just, God, they used to keep me up at night for years and years and years. And I feel like, through music and through my ability to recognize wisdom, to sort of grow in wisdom, which, trust me, I have a long way to go. But I'm peaking at the mindset that it takes to allow God's love to come into your heart enough to show you, like, hey, you don't know it all. And that's a good thing. And you were wrong. And that's a good thing. Okay? And that's I've talked a little bit on this video about just the ability to admit that we're wrong these days is, I think, going to be a superpower. The ability to just laugh things off and be like, oh, you're right. Total idiot. I mean, just yesterday I did something so foolish. And I feel like had I not truly internalized the message of the gospel and recognized that my self-esteem is not tied to my actions, that I have worth, an inherent worth as a child of God, like to really understand that is newer for me. And what I did yesterday was so goofy that it would have sent me into a tailspin in the past, an absolute meltdown tailspin, because it was scary. Like, oh my God, I'm such a fool. What else am I getting wrong? Oh my God, I can't admit it. How can this person even love me when they see this from me? But instead, yesterday, it just led to laughter. It just still makes me laugh. We laughed and laughed and laughed about it. And I promise you, in my 20s, that was one of the biggest foolhardy things I did, was just, if somebody came at me, somebody saw my flaws, if somebody saw past the facade I wanted them to see, I would absolutely melt down and sabotage the relationship. I'd get mad at the other person rather than admit to myself and the other person. And I had to realize it was because it was tied to my self-esteem, and it was tied to a trauma, and it would kick up such a level of fear that I was unlovable, that I couldn't face it. So I have a lot of compassion for other people now, recognizing that might be why they're doubling down and not admitting they're wrong. But I think for those of us that can get to a place where we can start to not take ourselves so seriously and laugh a little bit and admit when we're wrong the minute that we're wrong and course correct. Admit we're wrong and course correct. And that's the superpower, because there's maybe a lot of need to course correct these days. We'll see. So that being said, we'll talk more about this in another time. But I also want to mention that I'm releasing, a lot of the music that I've been releasing. It's been a great practice in not being, releasing my need to control and perfectionism, because, sometimes when I get a video or a song, it can be infinite. I can infinitely keep fixing it, infinitely keep working on it. And especially when I've been working within certain budgets, it's been great to be like, hey, this is it. You got to cut it off here. It's good enough. Those are magic words for a musician or for a creative. It is good enough, because the truth is, then you get some time on it, you get some distance, and it doesn't sound nearly as bad as you thought. You might have been hypercritical, might have been focusing entirely too much, and the gist was there, right? So, the music that I release on my Friday night videos, there's some videos that are very, very rough. And there's some times that I've been on a podcast and played horribly, and I've had to, I come up against this perfectionism demon all the time. I want you guys to think I'm perfect at music. And in many cases as a music teacher, there's a pressure like, why are you teaching if you're not perfect? And there's many people who only want to take lessons with those absolute masters. But I'm here to tell you that I'm not one of them. I am not perfect at music. But what I do feel like I can do is encourage anybody and everybody to pick up their instrument as part of David's army band, to explain to you that it's not about being the best. And that in many ways, that competitive overlay of everything in life being a competition, and many people are stuck in that, it's going to hold you back from living a truly loving and fulfilled and magical life, because there's so much more to life than competition. So on that note, I'm releasing a song I want you guys to check out. It's a rough of it, and I hope to have out a more fully produced version of it soon, somewhere in the future, but I don't have it yet. And in the meantime, it's just too politically pertinent. It's a song that I co-wrote with somebody that wants to stay anonymous for the moment, and it's called Let Go, Jerry, Go, and it's the idea of like these geriatric politicians that just won't let go of the reins, right? They've been such beep holes about not having a succession plan and instead just wanting to stay in power. And they've absolutely, in my opinion, it's not about Republican, Democrat. It's all across the board. These old politicians that just will not let go. And I wrote this song last summer, I guess. I played it at an open mic in March, and then this stuff with Joe Biden happening where he's just like refusing to let go of the reins in a very sad way, actually. I decided to release that song. So that's going to be up, I guess maybe, it'll be up by the time this is out. So check that out, Let Go, Jerry, Go. Not a perfect version at all, but the timing just feels too right. And by the time I get a perfect version, it might be too late. I don't know. We'll see. Or maybe those politicians will still be in power. But many of them, I think that's the last thing I'll say is competition can be a drug. Perfectionism can be a drug. You can be addicted to it. Addicted to the validation you get from thinking that you're better than others, or that you're the top, or that other people are admiring you or worshiping you. And I know what that's like. Not from life, but from being with the cool kids when I was in high school, and recognizing how empty of all that was, but how I was addicted to the idea that other people wanted to be me. And I think that's what's happening to a lot of these politicians. They can't let go because they have nothing if they're not that. They put everything into this competitive, be the best, be on top of the pile. It's so sad. Another great place to dispel that is a book called Hope for the Flowers by Trina Paulus, one of my favorites, about these caterpillars that are all climbing to the top of the tree and nobody knows why, but they just know they want to get up there because everybody else is doing it. And turns out it's really nothing up there. So that's the place you can get when you jump off that tree. You just go climb and find a place to turn into a butterfly. And once you're a butterfly, that's a metaphor for being fully balanced as a human being, where your heart and your mind and your spirit are united, that you have a relationship, a loving relationship with your Creator that's then reflected to you in loving relationships around you. That's the true magic of life, and that's the true magic of music, and it has nothing to do with being perfect. So get out there today and start living your best life. I'll talk to you guys soon. This is Lindell Descant, Music as a Metaphor.